In light of more recent conflicts in the Persian Gulf, including the Gulf Wars of 1991 and 2003, as well as the ISIS insurgency of the mid-2010s, troubles for the post-war Gulf region have stretched further back even beyond the relatively internal conflict of the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s, when in July 1961, following independence being granted to the small oil-rich Sheikhdom of Kuwait by the British, Iraq made motions as to claiming this country as their own through military force, thus leading to an astonishingly fast build-up of Royal Navy, RAF and British Army units in the Gulf region that dissuaded a potential conflict under what was known as Operation Vantage, a clear illustration of the British Armed Forces' ability to muster into any potential war zone with speed and efficiency, before significant cutbacks in military spending saw these assets stripped from the UK's national defence. Kuwait is a small nation that has existed in various guises between Mesopotamia and Neolithic Eastern Arabia since up to 8,000 years BC, this sovereign parcel of land having been contested vigorously over the centuries due to its strategic position at the northwestern end of the Persian Gulf, its more recent history seeing the nation become an asset of the British Empire in the wake of World War I. As during 1919, following the collapse of the former ruling power of the Ottoman Empire, Kuwait was declared an independent Sheikhdom under British protectorate, a status quo that would remain until June 1961, when during the contraction of the British Empire in the 1950s and 60s, the country was granted independence and allowed to form a government under the rule of Sheikh Abdullah al-Salim al-Sabah, Kuwait being the first Arab state in the Persian Gulf to establish a constitution and parliament. On the other side of the border in neighbouring Iraq, the situation was much more volatile, as during the 14th of July revolution of 1958, Abd al-Karim Qasim, a major general in the Iraqi army, overthrew the Hashemite kingdom of Iraq in a bloody coup that saw King Faisal II, Prince Abdallah, and Prime Minister Nuri al-Sayyid all executed by the military, the rule of Qasim as president of Iraq being characterized through dissent and distrust by his followers as he sought to undertake radical democratic reforms while at the same time severing as many ties as possible with the West and neighbouring Iran, numerous assassination attempts being made on Qasim throughout 1959 and into 1960, though despite all of these he was able to escape with his life. In 1961, following the independence of Kuwait from the British, Qasim, as a show of strength to his turbulent associates, reignited the historic debate as to whether Kuwait was in fact a territory of the wider Iraqi nation, and claimed the country as the 19th province of Iraq, the annexation of Kuwait being understandable from a geostrategic viewpoint, as the nation sat on the Shatt al-Arab, Iraq's sole maritime border with the Persian Gulf, thus limiting Iraq's naval abilities in the region, Qasim immediately preparing his forces to undertake an invasion at the first possible opportunity, thus seeing Sheikh Abdullah turn to the protection of the British, who would guarantee his country's sovereignty, Kuwait also having major economic benefits for the UK, in that it also supplied 40% of Britain's oil supply, which the British government feared would be lost if Qasim and his openly anti-Western political ideologies were allowed to take control. Thus, following the pleas of the Sheikh for immediate assistance on June 30, 1961, British forces were mustered with the fastest possible haste to begin the landing of troops in the country from July 1st at the earliest, the main defence role for the British armed factions being through domination of the Persian Gulf by way of a strong naval presence, the closest elements of the British fleet being those stationed in the Bahrain Protectorate south of Kuwait, which included Lock-class frigate HMS Lock Alvi and the amphibious warfare squadron that included tank landing ship HMS Striker with half a squadron of Centurion tanks, while further afield were frigates HMS Lock Fine in Karachi and HMS Lock Ruthven in Mombasa. Further to the frigates, HMS Bulwark, the Centaur-class light fleet aircraft carrier with No. 42 Commando embarked, was about to visit Karachi before proceeding to the Persian Gulf for hot weather trials, the vessel instead being sent with all dispatch so as to arrive in Bahrain for July 1st, supported by HMS Lock Ruthven that had sailed from Mombasa, and HMS Lock Fine, which was ordered to cut short her docking and maintenance in order to sail from Karachi on July 1st, 10 days ahead of her scheduled arrival. Other aspects of the Royal Navy sent to the Persian Gulf, including elements of the Far East Fleet approaching Hong Kong, with the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, in the company of destroyer HMS Cassandra and frigate HMS Lincoln, which were ordered to alter course and make flank speed for Bahrain, these being later supported from the base at Hong Kong itself by HMS Yarmouth and HMS Llandaff, which was followed shortly thereafter by her replenishing group. Additionally, aircraft carrier HMS Centaur, accompanied by the destroyers HMS Sens, HMS Finisterre and HMS Camperdown, together with the support ship RFA Ulna, were sailed from Gibraltar and Malta, passing through the Suez Canal without incident on the night of July 5th, while frigate HMS Lockinch, with minesweepers HMS Ashton and HMS Roddington, as well as the tank landing craft HMS Messina, followed 3 days later, the fleet building in the Persian Gulf being accompanied by the 108th Minesweeping Squadron from the Mediterranean, due to the threat of Iraqi mines being laid off the coast of Kuwait, an extra minesweeper also being dispatched from the Aden colony, and a separate crew flown out of the United Kingdom. Such was the efficiency and HMS Bulwark's ability to be on the scene within 24 hours, meant 4-2 Commando was landed in Kuwait on July 1st, followed a day later by 4-5 Commando being flown in from Aden, creating a first-wave defence against any potential Iraqi assault, the eventual build-up of 5,700 men being completed after 9 days, and was considered to be a very satisfactory achievement by both the British and Kuwait governments. The duties of headquarters ship and communications link with the land forces being provided through River-class frigate HMS Meon, while the Bulwark, with its air-conditioned facilities, provided rest and cleanup for 200 men per day, as well as acting as the early warning radar guard, HMS Victorious assuming full air defence responsibility on arrival in the Gulf, controlling both her own aircraft of Supermarine Scimitars and the RAF Hawker Hunters stationed at the Kuwait New Airfield near Fawania, Operation Vantage also being the first occasion that Type 984 radar equipment had been used in an operational situation. Operating in the Middle East during the full heat of July was also a logistical problem for the Royal Navy, as with humidity reaching over 90% soon after sunrise, exacerbated by the Persian Gulf as the world's hottest sea, seeing temperatures of up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit recorded, it was essential that suitable respite was provided for the personnel aboard the many vessels now taking up position in the region, the ships of the line operating in 3-week shifts for crew recuperation, with the first to leave being the destroyer HMS Cassandra, which had been at sea continuously for 8 weeks, followed soon after by the departure of the carrier HMS Victorious and her escorts Lincoln, Yarmouth, Finisterre and Lochfine, those ships that had arrived on the scene earliest from the Far East Command, being replaced by support fleets drawn from the Mediterranean and home stations. On the ground in Kuwait, the Royal Marines Commando divisions of 4-2 Commando, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel E.R. Bridges, and 4-5 Commando, under Lieutenant Colonel L.G. Marsh, were successfully deployed, securing the Kuwait airfield and water distillation plant before digging themselves in on a dominating ridge with superb views across the surrounding countryside. The operational conditions for Marines in Kuwait again being exceptionally challenging due to the heat, with temperatures reaching a staggering 124 degrees Fahrenheit, while frequent sandstorms reduced visibility to between 200 and 500 yards, though despite these circumstances, reports of heat stroke were few, Royal Marine Commandos maintaining a frontline position until relieved by Army battalions 48 hours after deployment, with 4-2 and 4-5 Commando being flown by helicopter back to HMS Bulwark once their duties were completed. For the RAF, they took up rapid positions at the Kuwait airfield, immediately following the arrival of 4-2 Commando Royal Marines units on July 1st, with Hawker Hunter fighter bombers landing first, followed by Bristol Britannia transports from No. 99 and 511 squadrons carrying 4-5 Commando Royal Marines. These aircraft supported by 4 English Electric Canberra Recon aircraft from No. 88 Squadron, and later a further 8 examples from 213 Squadron, which began operating from Bahrain and flying deep into Iraqi territory so as to monitor enemy activity, the Iraqi armed forces being fully aware of these reconnaissance sorties, but had no functioning radar with which to intercept the RAF jets. Elements of the British Army, in the form of the 2nd Airborne Battalion, arriving on July 4th aboard de Havilland Comet jet transports and Bristol Britannias of 216 Squadron, while Handley Page Hastings and Blackburn Beverley transports brought in heavy equipment, further Army units arriving from Kenya with the 1st Battalion of the Royal Innis Killings on July 4th. In the field, the sandstorms, temperatures and lack of suitable infrastructure meant logistical issues continued throughout the course of the engagement, the biggest concern being communications, as due to the vast distances needed to be covered for theatre-wide channels caused by operations being conducted from Bahrain some 341 miles south of Kuwait, the British were forced to improvise through various means, including the use of HMS Bulwark as a long-range transmitter for units in the field, while signals were also relayed by Canberra bombers between Aden and Bahrain, together with RAF Percival Pembroke transport aircraft from A Flight No. 152 Squadron that were used for liaison duties between Bahrain, Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates, and Aden. An additional problem being that the RAF planes were using VHF communications, while the Royal Navy used UHF, again requiring a degree of improvisation in order to enable mutual communication. This situation only improving once the larger Illustrious class carrier HMS Victorious arrived on the scene, which also included a 170-mile range radar system aboard the ship, as complemented by its contingent of Fairey Gannet anti-submarine aircraft, the British ultimately establishing the first ground-based radar in Kuwait on July 18th. Sadly, the issues of sandstorms and other environmental hazards within the Gulf region meant operations in the Kuwait theatre did not go without incident, as on July 11, 1961, the British suffered their only casualty of the crisis when Hawker Hunter FGA-9, X-ray Golf 134, while carrying out a series of simulated ground attacks on Army positions at Mutla Ridge in Kuwait, hit the ground in poor visibility when recovering from a dummy rocket attack, killing Flying Officer F. Hennessy. The arrival of HMS Victorious, with its complement of Fairey Gannet and de Havilland Sea Vixen all-weather interceptors, being able to give the British a strong improvement in situational awareness, and thus incidents such as these were not repeated during the crisis. Eventually, following a national holiday in Iraq celebrating the 3rd anniversary of the 14th of July revolution, it became rapidly apparent that there were no motions by the Iraqi armed forces towards a build-up of troops as a prelude to a full invasion, British recon flights never observing any Iraqi military movements south of Basra, and not a single Iraqi army unit deployed along the border with Kuwait, thus leading, on July 20, 1961, to the British beginning their withdrawal from the region, with 4-2 Commando and 2 Para being sent back to Bahrain, and 4-5 Commando to the Aden colony, followed shortly afterwards by the Hunters from 208 Squadron also being redeployed to Bahrain, the remainder of British forces, after 9 weeks in the region, being withdrawn from Kuwait by the end of September, HMS Victorious being replaced by HMS Centaur in order to show the British flag in the Gulf area, while all transport aircraft had left the region by the beginning of August, the last British troops to be removed from Kuwait being on October 19, 1961, with their defensive positions replaced by factions from the Arab League, who sought not only to safeguard Kuwait from any potential invasion by Iraq, but also any possible attempt to recolonize Kuwait by the British. Though there was still a strong possibility that Qasim would attempt to force an invasion of Kuwait, this came to an end during the Ramadan Revolution of 1963, when following his attempt to part-nationalize the Anglo-American-owned Iraq Petroleum Company, which drew the ire of both the British and American governments, a coup orchestrated by the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party on February 8th of that year saw Qasim arrested and given a brief show trial before he was executed by firing squad, replaced in the role of President of Iraq by Ahmed Hassan al-Bakir, who would rule until 1979, after which he was succeeded by the notorious Saddam Hussein. Ultimately, Operation Vantage would prove to be one of the last instances where the British Empire was able to deploy a tactical force in strength to a potential war zone with such expedience that within the space of 24 hours, a fighting faction capable of repelling a significant enemy assault was in position and successfully entrenched on the front line, while also demonstrating the military strength of the UK in being able to dissuade potential conflicts through sheer numbers and technology, making it perhaps the last ever employment of the famous British gunboat diplomacy.